Mighty Switch Force Collection!
The Mighty Switch Force Collection contains 4 games. It contains the original Mighty Switch Force from 2011, its sequel Mighty Switch Force 2 which came out in 2013, a HD remake of the first game called Hyperdrive Edition, and a spin-off game with a multiplayer focus called Mighty Switch Force Academy. They are a series of puzzle platformers created by WayForward, otherwise known for the Shantae series. Does the puzzling nature of their platforming hold up today? I'm Glenn for SwitchUp. Thank you to WayForward for this review copy, and now let's find out. Starting with the original then, Mighty Switch Force tells the story of Officer Patricia Wagon, who is on the trail of the notorious Hooligan Sisters after they escaped custody, infesting Planetland with monsters whilst they were at it. As mentioned, the game plays out as a puzzle platformer, with Officer Wagon being equipped with a gun and her siren helmet which allows her to use the titular switching ability. Each level contains these blocks, some of which are transparent and some are solid. You can switch these around, and a good use of timing whilst using this mechanic will enable you to navigate the level, reaching higher parts by using these blocks as steps. You can switch them whilst in mid-air, and many levels will call for you to do this in order to make certain jumps. But what is it that you are traversing the levels for? Well, hidden within each level are the 5 Hooligan Sisters, and you must collect them in order to apprehend the gang once again. Once you have rounded up all of the gang members, your robotic colleague, General Gendarma, will land somewhere to extract you and end the level. To assist you further with this, there are a few other ways that you can get about. These blocks here, for example, will propel you across the level, but in order to use them, you must fall into them whilst they are transparent and then solidify them whilst in the middle. You will then be sent flying across the screen. Sometimes you will need to chain a few of these together in order to navigate parts of the level, and at these times your timing needs to be spot on in terms of when you change the property of each box for you to be successful. You can use this switching mechanic to your advantage in other ways too. For example, solidify a block whilst an enemy is walking past it and they will be catapulted into the screen, and you will need to do this at times in order to open locked doors or clear blocks pathways. The flip side of this, of course, is the same thing will happen to you if you are not careful when switching. Other blocks will only switch when not being touched, and this sets up some interesting puzzles with you needing to work out which block to stand on before switching them so that you can progress and not block your own path. You have free health points during a level, with additional health found through defeating certain enemies, and checkpoints are also strewn across the stage. You also have 3 lives per stage, and losing all 3 will see you having to attempt that particular level again from the very beginning. To keep things interesting, there is a par time for you to try and complete each course. There is no penalty for taking any longer than the time given, but it will give completionists and speedrunners something to aim for and provides a little more longevity if you are that way inclined. The second game, Mighty Switch Force 2, uses a similar premise to its predecessor, with the main gameplay change being that Patricia Wagon is now a firefighter rather than a police officer, and the now reformed Hooligan Sisters need rescuing rather than apprehending. The planet is on fire, which presents a new hazard, but in terms of gameplay mechanics, this plays very similarly to its predecessor. Rather than the gun of the previous game, your weapon of choice is now a fire hose, which can defeat enemies as well as douse in flames. It has an arc to its trajectory when fired that can see you miss enemies straight ahead at times, a bit like the rock in the Friday the 13th game on the NES. Although you can't duck in this game to account for it, you can, though, lessen the pressure of the water with a softer press of the button, which will change the trajectory slightly. The fire setting is used within the puzzles at times, such as needing to decide when to keep enemies on fire so that they will in turn destroy blocks that are blocking your way. Or other times it may be that you need to use the pressure of the water to knock enemies into certain points so that you can defeat them. This time there is also a collectible of sorts to be found in each level in the way of a baby that needs rescuing. I played the original back in the day but never got round to the sequel, and for my money it improves on the original in a lot of ways. Having said that though, it is a shame that the gameplay mechanics are still so similar, with just a couple of new elements brought in. The Hyperdrive Edition, as stated earlier, is a HD remake of the original. The art style is hand drawn as opposed to pixel based this time, and it looks very similar to the other WayForward series mentioned, Shantae. It includes the exact same 20 levels as the original, although thankfully it also has 20 brand new levels thrown in for good measure. The final game, Mighty Switch Force Academy, is the most different of the 4. It uses a zoomed out perspective to show you the whole level as you make your way around the virtual world within the Switch Force Academy, rounding up the Hooligan Sisters. In some ways it reminded me a little bit of Pac-Man, in that you are traversing a maze collecting something to be able to complete a level, but it still plays very much like a platformer with the usual laws of gravity applying, and in fact sometimes being essential, as you will need to drop down from the very bottom of the screen in order to reach the top. There are 20 levels included and an additional 5 which are exact recreations of the first 5 levels in the original game, albeit from the new perspective. I did like how this one changed the formula up, as I was becoming a bit fatigued of the very similar gameplay mechanics from the first 3 games. The control scheme across all 4 games is the same and it's very simple. The D-pad controls movement, B makes your character jump, Y fires your weapon, and A enables the switch mechanic. They work very well for the most part, with some initial problems swapping between B and A buttons when having to jump and then switch platforms a possibility, but it does become second nature fairly quickly. Gameplay across the whole series is a lot of fun, presenting a much faster paced puzzle game than you usually find, with some of the levels becoming quite fiendish in their design at times. The games are very similar to each other and I did start to find them repetitive. For comparison's sake, if you think of the Castlevania collection on the Switch, whilst they are all quite similar games to each other to an extent, they are different enough that I would dip in and out of these quite frequently, whereas with this collection I would probably have to finish one of the games and then have a few weeks break from it before starting the next one to avoid fatigue setting in. Gameplay receives 15 out of 20, whereas the controls receive 17 out of 20. In terms of the visuals, there are 2 art styles on show as alluded to earlier. You have the pixel art style of the original games and the hand-drawn style of the remake and Academy. The pixel art style of the first 2 games holds up well, although playing the HD remake really made me realise just how zoomed in the camera was in the original game. It's not a major issue, but once you play the remake, which has its camera set back a bit more, it becomes quite noticeable and made it harder for me to enjoy the original. The backgrounds use colour effectively, although they are very static. Both the zoomed in camera and static backgrounds however were fixed in the sequel, and the pixel art has certainly aged better in this game. The remake's hand-drawn style is very clean, with colourful characters that are animated well, plus a better camera perspective as mentioned earlier. Academy's mix of hand-drawn sprites and wireframe levels also works well. It's just a shame that the game's perspective is so zoomed out. I appreciate it's unavoidable for what the game is trying to do, especially with the multiplayer aspect, but it does make it difficult to see what's going on at times. Audio wise, the music is extremely upbeat and fits the fast paced nature of the game very well. Speech is also used sporadically throughout the game, usually when you collect one of the villains or clear a level, and it all works well to round out the feel that the game was going for. Visuals receive 15 out of 20, whilst the audio receives 16 out of 20. The Mighty Switch Force collection costs £15.99, €17.99 or $19.99, and for this price you are of course getting 4 games, one of which has a multiplayer element to it, although the inclusion of the remake does make the original feel a bit redundant in all honesty. Now I know that there were also 2 games released in this series for DSiWare, being Mighty Flip Champ and Mighty Milky Way, and it would have been nice seeing these included, although I don't know how possible that was. Not because I think £16 for 4 games is poor value, it's more just that it would have mixed the gameplay up a bit, as these games are just so very similar to each other. As it stands, if you are a fan of the series though, then the value for money is certainly there, and the puzzle-like layout of every stage is extremely clever. I just found repetition set in a bit too quickly for my liking, and value scores 15 out of 20. To conclude, the Mighty Switch Force collection contains 4 games that are each very good in their own right, and the collection itself is going for a very reasonable price. My main issue was the similarity between the games and the effect that this has on the product as a whole. I love rhubarb crumble and custard. If I have that one day after my dinner, I'm a happy man. If I have it for 2 nights in a row, it's still okay. 4 nights on the bounce though, and I start to become a bit sick of it. I would need to instead have the rhubarb crumble once a week for 4 weeks to maintain maximum enjoyment. And the Mighty Switch Force collection is that rhubarb crumble. the Mighty Switch Force collection gets a SwitchUp score of 78%. Many thanks everybody for watching. Please do remember to leave a like if you did like what you've just seen. Many thanks as always to our Patreons for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.